There are places in this world where history doesn't just whisper, it screams, where the ghosts of 1,000 performances still linger in the rafters, where the very floorboards remember the weight of legends. The Palace Theater on Broadway is one such place. But this isn't just a story about a building. This is a story about ambition so wild it bordered on insanity, about dreams that burned so bright they consumed everything in their path, about the rise and fall of an empire built on nothing more than lights, music, and the desperate human need to be entertained. When you walk past 1564 Broadway today, you might not feel it. The modern marquee, the updated facade, they hide something darker, something more magnificent. Because beneath the renovations and the years of neglect and revival lies a palace that once ruled an entire industry. A palace that saw the greatest performers of the 20th century grace its stage. A palace that was born from one man's beautiful madness and died 1,000 small deaths before finding resurrection. This is the story of vaudeville's cathedral. This is the story of how a single theater became synonymous with success itself, where performers would literally kill to get booked, where the phrase, playing the palace, meant you'd reach the absolute pinnacle of show business. But it's also a story about America, about how we build our temples to entertainment, how we worship at the altar of celebrity, and how we abandon our gods when newer, shinier deities come along. The palace wasn't just a theater. It was a promise. It was proof that in America, if you could make people laugh or cry or gasp in wonder, you could become royalty. But like all kingdoms, this one would eventually fall. The question that haunts us still is whether it ever truly rose again. It's 1913, and Broadway is transforming into something the world has never seen before. Electric lights are replacing gas lamps, and the Great White Way is earning its name, burning so bright you can supposedly read a newspaper at midnight just from the glow of the marquees. In the middle of this transformation, a man named Martin Beck has a vision that most people think is completely insane. Beck isn't your typical theater mogul. Born in Slovakia, arriving in America with almost nothing, he clawed his way up through the vaudeville circuit with the tenacity of someone who understood that in this country you either dominated or disappeared. By 1913, he's already powerful. He controls the Orpheum Circuit, a string of vaudeville theaters stretching across the western United States. But Beck wants more. He wants to build something that will make every other theater in America look like a barn. The location he chooses is perfect and problematic in equal measure. 47th Street and Broadway, right in the heart of Times Square, where real estate prices are astronomical and competition is cutthroat. The plot costs a fortune. The construction will cost even more. Everyone tells Beck he's making a mistake. There are already theaters on Broadway, good theaters. Why does the world need another one? But Beck doesn't want to build another theater. He wants to build the theater, the palace that will end all palaces. The architect he hires is Kirchhoff and Rose, a firm known for their elaborate, almost absurdly ornate designs. Beck gives them simple instructions. Make it magnificent. Make it so beautiful that performers will weep when they first see it. Make it so grand that audiences will feel like they're entering another world. And critically, make it so acoustically perfect that even a whisper from the stage can be heard in the last row of the balcony. The construction takes months, and the costs spiral wildly beyond any reasonable budget. Beck pours his fortune into it, then borrows more, then pours that in too. He's building with Italian marble, installing crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's houses, creating a color scheme of ivory and gold that makes the interior look like it was designed for actual royalty. The stage is built larger than most Broadway stages of the era. The dressing rooms, and this is where you can see Beck's psychology at work, are designed to be luxurious enough that performers will feel like stars even before they step into the spotlight. March 24th, 1913. Opening night. The Palace Theater opens its doors for the first time, and the audience that streams in is immediately stunned into silence. This isn't a theater, it's a cathedral. The grand lobby, with its soaring ceilings and elaborate plasterwork, makes you feel small in the best possible way. The auditorium itself, when you first glimpse it, takes your breath away. 1,800 seats, each one carefully positioned for optimal sightlines and acoustics. The proscenium arch, decorated with cherubs and flourishes that belong in a European palace. The curtain, heavy and rich, hiding a stage that seems to stretch back forever. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. Opening night is a disaster. The show Beck has programmed is too high class, too refined. He's booked opera singers and classical musicians thinking he's giving the audience culture. But vaudeville audiences don't want culture. They want excitement. They want comedy and acrobatics and dancing girls and trained animals and magicians. They want the raw, electric energy that made vaudeville the dominant entertainment form in America. Beck has built the perfect palace for vaudeville, but filled it with the wrong kind of entertainment. The reviews are brutal. Critics call it pretentious. Audiences stay away in droves. Within weeks, Beck realizes he's made a catastrophic miscalculation. He's spent everything building this palace, and now nobody wants to come inside. This is where the story could have ended, where the palace could have become just another failed Broadway venture, another cautionary tale about hubris and poor market research. But Martin Beck, for all his faults, isn't a quitter. He makes a hard decision. He steps back. He brings in new management, people who understand what vaudeville audiences actually want. And slowly, painfully, the palace begins to transform into what it was always meant to be. By 1914, the palace has new management, and that management understands one crucial thing. Vaudeville isn't about sophistication, it's about variety, about giving audiences so much entertainment packed into one show that they leave feeling dizzy with delight. The new bookers start programming the palace the way vaudeville should be programmed. 8 acts, sometimes 9, all killers, no filler. Comedy acts that leave audiences gasping for breath. Acrobats who make you believe humans can fly. Singers with voices that can shatter glass and break hearts. Animal acts that are equal parts amazing and slightly dangerous. And something magical starts to happen. The palace begins to develop a reputation. Performers start to notice that when you play the palace, something changes. Suddenly, you're getting offers from other theaters. Suddenly, your name is in the papers. Suddenly, you're not just a vaudeville performer, you're a star. This is when the phrase, "playing the palace," enters the American lexicon. It becomes the dream that every vaudeville performer in America shares. Every small-time act playing tiny theaters in Topeka or Tallahassee, they all have the same fantasy. Someday, somehow, they'll play the palace. It becomes more than a booking. It becomes a benediction, proof that you've made it, that you're one of the chosen few. The booking system at the palace develops a reputation for being both ruthlessly fair and completely arbitrary. Fair, because if you're good enough, you'll get your shot regardless of who you know. Arbitrary, because what constitutes good enough seems to change week by week, show by show. Performers develop superstitions. They wear lucky costumes. They refuse to rehearse certain bits before opening night. They make deals with God and the devil in equal measure, anything to get that telegram that says you're booked at the palace. Inside the theater, a culture develops that's unique in show business history. The palace isn't just a workplace. It's a community, a university, a combat zone. Performers watch each other's acts from the wings with a mixture of admiration and jealousy. They steal bits from each other, improve on them, pass them along. The dressing rooms become laboratories where comedy is refined to its purest essence, where dramatic timing is perfected to the microsecond. If you can kill at the palace, you can kill anywhere in America. The stage managers at the palace become legendary figures in their own right. They run the shows with military precision. You miss your entrance cue at the palace, and you might never be booked again. Your costume malfunctions, and you better figure out how to make it part of the act. The orchestra is working with different acts all day long. sight-reading arrangements, following performers who might speed up or slow down depending on how the audience is responding. It's controlled chaos, held together by professionalism and the shared understanding that the palace is special, that when you're working the palace, you're part of something bigger than yourself. The architecture of the building itself becomes part of the legend. Performers talk about the acoustics like they're magical. You can hear everything from the stage, every laugh, every gasp, every cough. When an act is bombing, you know it immediately. The silence from the audience isn't just absence of sound. It's a presence, a weight that crushes you. But when an act is killing, when the audience is with you, the sound that comes back is like nothing else in the world. It's not just laughter or applause. It's validation. It's love. It's the feeling that you've connected with hundreds of strangers all at once and made them feel something they'll remember forever. Martin Beck, watching all this unfold, must have felt vindicated. His vision, his madman's utopia, was working. The palace was becoming exactly what he'd dreamed. Not just a theater, but the theater, the standard by which all others would be judged. But Beck, as we'll see, wouldn't get to enjoy his triumph for long. Because in 1913, while Beck was building his palace, a businessman named Edward Franklin Albee was building an empire. E.F. Albee is a name most people today don't recognize, but in the 1920s, he was one of the most powerful men in American entertainment. Albee controlled the Keith Albee Circuit, the largest vaudeville theater chain in America. He was known as ruthless, calculating, and absolutely brilliant at the business side of entertainment. Where Martin Beck was a dreamer, Albee was a strategist. And Albee wanted the palace. The business warfare between Beck and Albee played out over several years in ways that were sometimes subtle, sometimes brutal, but always fascinating. Albee would book his best acts exclusively to Keith Albee theaters, making it harder for the palace to get top talent. Beck would counter by developing new acts, finding unknown performers and turning them into stars, proving that the palace could make careers. Albee would buy theaters around the country, controlling the circuits that acts needed to tour profitably. Beck would negotiate better terms for performers, making the palace the one venue where vaudevillians actually got treated with something approaching respect. But economics is a harsh mistress, and Albee had deeper pockets. In 1926, after years of financial pressure and business maneuvering that would make a corporate raider proud, Martin Beck lost control of the palace. Albee's Keith Albee organization took over, and Beck, the man who built the palace, was forced out of his own creation. There's a detail about this that breaks your heart if you know the context. Beck negotiated one thing in his exit: a room, a small office in the Palace Theater where he could still be part of the building he created. They called it the Policy King's Last Room, and Beck would show up there almost every day for years afterward, watching the theater operate without him, seeing his vision continue, but no longer being able to shape it. Imagine that. You build something magnificent, something that changes an entire industry, and then you're reduced to watching it through a window, a ghost in your own palace. Beck would sit in that small room, and performers who remembered him, who owed their careers to him, would sometimes stop by to pay their respects. But mostly he sat alone, the king without a kingdom, the architect without a building. Under Albee's management, the palace entered its golden age, which is somehow even more tragic. The theater became more successful, more prestigious, more important than ever before. The greatest performers in vaudeville played the palace. Will Rogers, Eddie Cantor, Fanny Brice, the Marx Brothers, Sophie Tucker, W.C. Fields, Ethel Merman before she became a Broadway legend, Fred Astaire before Hollywood made him immortal. Every act that was anyone played the palace, and every performance was recorded in the theater's history like a religious text. The booking office at the palace became the most powerful room in vaudeville. The men who decided who played the palace and when effectively controlled careers. They could make a nobody into a somebody with one booking. They could destroy an established act by simply never booking them again. The power was intoxicating and, in many cases, corrupting. Albee ran the palace with an iron fist inside a velvet glove. He maintained the standards Beck had established, only the best acts, only the most professional productions. But he added a level of business sophistication that Beck never had. Albee understood that the palace wasn't just a theater, it was a brand, a symbol, a promise to audiences that if they bought a ticket to the palace, they were guaranteed the best entertainment in America. This era, from roughly 1926 to the early 1930s, represents vaudeville at its absolute peak. The palace was selling out every show, sometimes running 3 shows a day to meet demand. The money flowing through the box office was astronomical. Performers were becoming wealthy, famous, beloved. Vaudeville seemed invincible, permanent, eternal. But something was changing in America, something that nobody at the palace quite understood yet. Something that would destroy vaudeville faster and more completely than anyone could have imagined. It was flickering in movie theaters across the country. It was crackling through radio sets in living rooms. And it was coming for the palace like a freight train. Before we get to the fall, we need to talk about what made the palace special during its glory years. And nothing captures the magic and madness of the place better than the showgirls, the dancers, the beauties, the performers who added glamour and spectacle to every show. The showgirls at the palace weren't just dancers. They were celebrities in their own right. They had fan clubs. They received marriage proposals by the dozens. Their photographs appeared in newspapers and magazines. And they worked harder than almost anyone else in vaudeville, performing multiple shows a day, rehearsing between performances, maintaining the kind of appearance that audiences expected while dealing with conditions that were often brutal. The term shooting showgirls comes from the choreography style that was popular during the palace's heyday. The dancers would enter the stage in formations that looked like military maneuvers, with girls shooting out from the wings in perfect synchronization, creating geometric patterns that dazzled audiences. It required split-second timing, incredible stamina, and the kind of teamwork that made professional sports teams look casual by comparison. Behind the scenes, the showgirls' lives were a mixture of glamour and grind. They'd arrive at the palace in the morning, often after performing at another venue the night before. They'd rehearse new numbers, fix costumes, argue with choreographers, support each other through injuries and heartbreak, and the constant fear that you were getting too old, that younger girls were waiting to take your spot. The dressing rooms were their sanctuary and their battlefield. This is where friendships were forged that would last a lifetime, where rivalries burned hot enough to explode into actual physical fights, where young women from small towns across America transformed themselves into the glamorous creatures that audiences came to see. The makeup alone could take an hour, thick stage makeup designed to be visible from the back of the balcony, creating faces that were beautiful but almost mask-like in their perfection. One of the most famous groups of showgirls at the palace was assembled by a choreographer named Ned Wayburn, who treated precision dancing like a science. He'd drill his girls relentlessly, demanding perfection in every kick, every turn, every smile. He invented the Wayburn walk, a specific way of moving across the stage that made the dancers look like they were floating. He choreographed numbers that were so complex they required weeks of rehearsal, creating visual spectacles that no one had ever seen on a vaudeville stage before. The physical demands were enormous. These women were performing in an era before modern dance medicine, before anyone really understood the toll that dancing multiple shows a day could take on the human body. Injuries were common and often career-ending, a torn ligament, a twisted ankle that didn't heal properly. That was it. You were done. And there was no safety net, no insurance, no workers' compensation. If you couldn't perform, you simply didn't work. But the stories these women could tell. The palace showgirls saw everything. They watched careers being born and dying in real time. They knew which performers were genuine and which ones were frauds. They could tell you which comedian was going to be a star 5 years before the rest of the world figured it out. They witnessed the feuds, the affairs, the nervous breakdowns, the triumphs. They were the eyes and ears of the palace, and their gossip network was more reliable than any newspaper. There are photographs from this era that capture something essential about the palace showgirls. Black and white images of women in elaborate costumes, feathers and sequins and headdresses that weigh as much as small children. But if you look closely at their faces, past the makeup and the theatrical smiles, you can see something else. Determination, ambition, the knowledge that they were part of something special, something that would never come again. Many of these women went on to have successful careers in early Hollywood, bringing the lessons they learned at the palace to the movie industry. Others married wealthy men they met stage door after performances. Some disappeared into normal lives, raising children and never mentioning to anyone that they once danced at the most famous theater in America. A few tragic stories ended in poverty or worse, victims of the depression or bad luck, or the simple cruelty of time. But for a brief moment, these women were queens. They stood on the stage of the Palace Theater, bathed in the spotlight, hearing the applause of hundreds, feeling the power of their own bodies doing impossible things with grace and precision. That's not nothing. That's something worth remembering. To understand why the palace mattered so much, you have to understand what vaudeville was in American culture. This wasn't just entertainment. This was how America talked to itself, how it worked through its anxieties and celebrated its triumphs, how immigrant communities maintained their cultural identities while simultaneously assimilating into American life. The variety format of vaudeville was perfect for a country of immigrants. Every show was a miniature America. Irish comedians followed by Jewish singers, followed by Italian acrobats, followed by African-American dancers. The diversity was the point. Audiences could see their own cultures represented while also being exposed to traditions they'd never encountered before. It was democracy in action, capitalism at its purest, where talent and audience response were the only currencies that mattered. The palace, as the crown jewel of vaudeville, became America's stage. What played at the palace reflected what was happening in the country. During World War I, patriotic acts dominated, with flags and military themes and songs designed to sell war bonds. During the Roaring '20s, the acts became more risque, more jazz-influenced, reflecting the loosening of social mores. During the early Depression years, escapist comedy and spectacular production numbers offered audiences relief from their daily struggles. The Muses, those Greek goddesses of the arts, were said to inspire all creative endeavors. At the palace, the Muses were working overtime. This was where comedy was being invented in real time, where performers like Jack Benny and George Burns were developing the personas they'd use for the rest of their careers, where comedy styles that would dominate American entertainment for decades were being refined night after night, show after show. The comedy at the palace ranged from sophisticated wordplay to slapstick violence to ethnic humor that would make modern audiences deeply uncomfortable. Performers developed characters: the Jewish immigrant, the Irish drunk, the henpecked husband, the dizzy flapper, and these characters became so familiar that audiences would start laughing the moment the performer walked on stage, before a single word was spoken. The timing these comedians developed was supernatural. They knew exactly how long to wait for a laugh to peak before hitting the next joke. They could feel the energy of the room and adjust their performance accordingly. This wasn't rehearsed, it was instinct, developed over thousands of performances. The musicians who played the palace were artists in their own right, often more technically skilled than the popular music stars of today. Jazz bands, classical violinists, opera singers slumming in vaudeville for the money, novelty acts with instruments nobody had ever seen before. The music at the palace exposed American audiences to sounds from around the world, helping to create the musical melting pot that would eventually produce uniquely American art forms like jazz and rock and roll. Then there were the specialty acts, the performers who didn't fit into any conventional category, but were absolutely essential to the vaudeville experience. Ventriloquists with dummies that seemed impossibly alive, magicians whose tricks left audiences convinced they'd witnessed actual miracles, escape artists who risked death every performance, mind readers who either had genuine psychic powers or were so skilled at cold reading that the difference didn't matter. Animal acts were huge at the palace: trained seals, dancing bears, dogs that could do mathematics, elephants that could paint, horses that could count. These acts seem cruel or absurd to modern sensibilities, but audiences in the 1920s found them magical. The bond between trainer and animal was often genuine, and the best animal acts had a humor and charm that transcended the obvious exploitation inherent in the concept. The palace stage saw things that would be impossible today. Entire Broadway-scale production numbers condensed into 15-minute acts. Acrobats performing tricks without safety equipment, one mistake away from death or paralysis. Performers working with fire, with swords, with dangerous chemicals, all in the service of creating wonder. This was the Palace of the Muses, a place where human creativity was pushed to its absolute limits, where artists competed to create something that had never been seen before, where the only rule was that you had to entertain. No matter what your act was, no matter how bizarre or conventional, if you could make an audience at the Palace Theater respond, you were a success. By the late 1920s, vaudeville was dying, though most people at the Palace didn't want to admit it. The signs were everywhere if you knew where to look. Movie theaters were proliferating across America, offering entertainment that was cheaper, more comfortable, and increasingly sophisticated. Radio was bringing entertainment directly into people's homes for free. The economic conditions of the Depression meant that people had less money for live entertainment. But the Palace kept operating as if nothing had changed, as if the good times would last forever. This is when the fix begins, the desperate attempts to save vaudeville by adapting to the new realities of American entertainment. The Palace started showing movies between vaudeville acts, trying to give audiences the best of both worlds. At first, this seemed to work. Audiences would come for the movie and stay for the live performance, or vice versa. But gradually, inevitably, the balance shifted. The movies became the main attraction, and the live acts became the opening act. The performers who built their careers at the Palace watched this happening with horror and disbelief. They'd mastered the most difficult form of entertainment in the world, live performance in front of demanding audiences, and suddenly it didn't matter. Suddenly, a flickering image on a screen was more valuable than a human being standing in front of you, making you laugh or cry through sheer force of personality and skill. Some performers adapted. They went to Hollywood and became movie stars, translating their vaudeville skills to the new medium. The Marx Brothers, who killed at the Palace, became movie legends. Fred Astaire, who danced at the Palace, became the most elegant presence in Hollywood history. W.C. Fields, who perfected his misanthropic persona at the Palace, became a film icon. But for every success story, there were dozens of failures. Brilliant vaudeville performers who couldn't translate their talents to film, who didn't photograph well, who needed the immediate feedback of a live audience to properly deliver their material. The Palace tried various fixes. They booked bigger names, paying unsustainable salaries to get stars who could still draw crowds. They updated the interior, trying to make the theater feel modern and relevant. They experimented with different combinations of live acts and films. Nothing worked for long. The economics were brutal and unavoidable. A movie print could be shown hundreds of times across the country, while a live performer could only be in one place at one time. The math simply didn't work in vaudeville's favor. By the early 1930s, the Palace was in serious trouble. The theater that once ran 3 shows a day was struggling to fill seats for one. The booking office that once wielded enormous power was begging acts to perform for reduced rates. The backstage areas that once buzzed with energy now felt haunted, echoing with memories of better days. Management tried one more fix. They converted the palace into a full-time movie theater. In 1932, the theater that had defined vaudeville, that had been the dream destination of every live performer in America, stopped booking live acts entirely. For the first time since it opened, the palace stage was empty of human performers. Movies flickered on a screen that had once held the greatest entertainers in the world, and audiences watched in air-conditioned comfort, never knowing what they'd lost. Some of the old performers would come back to the palace during this era, buying tickets to see movies in the theater where they'd once been stars. They'd sit in the audience, looking at the stage where they'd once stood, remembering the feeling of connecting with hundreds of people at once, of being alive in a way that most people never experience. Then the movie would start, and they'd leave, unable to bear watching the ghost of what vaudeville had become. But the palace wasn't dead yet. Like a heavyweight boxer who refuses to stay down, the theater would have one more moment of glory, one more chance to prove that live performance still mattered in America. And surprisingly, that moment would come not from entertainment, but from sports. Babe Ruth, the Sultan of SWAT, the Bambino, the greatest baseball player of his era and arguably of all time, had a complicated relationship with show business. He'd made promotional appearances before, usually awkward affairs where his natural charisma was undercut by his lack of polish and preparation. But in 1921, at the height of his fame, Ruth did something unexpected. He agreed to perform a vaudeville act at the Palace Theater. This wasn't supposed to work. Ruth wasn't a performer, he was an athlete. He couldn't sing or dance or tell jokes with the skill of professional entertainers. But what Ruth understood instinctively was presence. He knew how to own a room, how to make people feel special just by being near him. And the booking agents at the palace understood something crucial. People would pay to see Babe Ruth do literally anything. Ruth's act was simple. He'd come out on stage, tell a few stories about baseball, answer questions from the audience, maybe swing a bat a few times, sign some autographs. By vaudeville standards, it was barely an act at all. But it didn't matter. The palace was packed for every performance. People who'd never seen a vaudeville show in their lives bought tickets just to be in the same room as Babe Ruth. This opened a new avenue for the palace: celebrity appearances. Athletes, politicians, famous criminals who'd been released from prison, anyone who'd achieved notoriety could book the palace and draw an audience. It wasn't traditional vaudeville, but it proved that there was still value in live presence, in the experience of seeing famous people in person rather than just reading about them or seeing them in newsreels. Ruth's run at the palace was relatively brief, just a few weeks, but it left a lasting impact. It showed that the theater could adapt, could find new ways to give audiences what they wanted, and it brought a different crowd to the palace. Working-class people who might have been intimidated by the theater's grand reputation, but who felt comfortable coming to see a baseball player. The stories from Ruth's palace run are legendary. He'd sometimes come to the theater directly from Yankee Stadium, still sweaty from a game, and perform that same evening. He'd sign autographs until his hand cramped. He'd pose for photographs with every kid who asked. He was gracious and genuine in a way that the polished vaudeville performers sometimes weren't, and audiences loved him for it. There's a deeper symbolism to Ruth playing the palace. Baseball, like vaudeville, was America's pastime, the thing that united people across class and ethnic lines. Ruth himself was proof of the American dream, a kid from a rough background who became the biggest star in the country through talent and charisma. Seeing him on the palace stage was like watching two American institutions acknowledge each other, validate each other. But Ruth's success at the palace also highlighted vaudeville's fundamental problem. In an age of mass media, individual personalities mattered more than craft or skill. Ruth didn't need years of training to succeed at the palace. He just needed to be himself. This was the beginning of our modern celebrity culture, where fame itself becomes the talent, where being known is more valuable than being skilled at any particular thing. The 1930s and 1940s were brutal decades for the Palace. The theater cycled through management changes, format experiments, financial crises, and periods of outright closure. Each time it seemed like the theater had found a sustainable model, the ground would shift again. During the Depression, the Palace became a movie house full-time, showing double features to audiences who could barely afford the ticket price. The grand lobby that once welcomed high society patrons now saw bread lines snaking past the entrance. The theater that represented American excess and confidence now served as a reminder of how far the country had fallen. World War II brought temporary reprieve. Military personnel on leave wanted entertainment, and the Palace provided it, a mixture of movies, occasional live performances, and USO shows that featured both established stars and newcomers. The theater took on a patriotic sheen, covering its walls with war bonds, posters, and making the space available for military recruitment events. But this was survival, not success. After the war, the Palace faced new competition from an unexpected source: television. Now people didn't even need to leave their homes to be entertained. The economic model that had sustained vaudeville, thousands of people buying tickets to see live performance, was obsolete. Why pay to sit in a theater when you could sit on your couch and watch entertainment for free? The physical building began to deteriorate. Maintenance costs were cut. The marble got scuffed. The chandeliers grew dim. The seats became uncomfortable. The Palace, which once set the standard for theatrical luxury, now looked shabby compared to newer theaters and modern movie houses with their better sightlines and sound systems. Various management companies cycled through ownership, each promising to restore the Palace to its former glory, each failing. Some tried legitimate theaters, booking Broadway shows that weren't successful enough for longer runs. Others tried concert promotions, bringing in popular music acts. A few attempted to revive vaudeville, but those experiments were particularly sad. Aging performers doing their old acts for sparse audiences who came more out of nostalgia than genuine interest. By the 1960s, the Palace was in danger of being demolished entirely. This was the era when New York was tearing down historic buildings to make room for modern development, when architectural preservation wasn't yet a priority. The Palace seemed doomed to become a parking lot or office building, its history erased, its contributions forgotten. But something interesting was happening in American culture. The generation that had grown up with vaudeville was aging, and they were starting to feel nostalgic for what they'd lost. Books and documentaries about vaudeville's golden age began appearing. The Palace started being mentioned not as a functioning theater, but as a historical landmark, a symbol of entertainment history. This nostalgia wouldn't save the Palace, not immediately, but it planted seeds. It made people start asking whether we should preserve these buildings, whether there was value in maintaining physical connections to our cultural past. The Palace became a cause, something worth fighting for, even if nobody could quite figure out what to do with it. The fall of the Palace wasn't dramatic. It was slow, sad, inexorable. Every year brought fresh indignities: leaks in the roof, broken seats, dwindling audiences, confused purpose. The theater that once defined success now defined failure, a monument to the impermanence of fame and the brutality of changing tastes. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In 1965, Judy Garland played the Palace. This wasn't just another booking, it was a resurrection, a moment when the building's history and a performer's legacy collided in a way that created something magical. Garland, by 1965, was a complicated figure, a former child star, an addiction survivor, a woman who'd been chewed up and spit out by Hollywood multiple times. But she could still sing like an angel, and she had something that was increasingly rare in entertainment, a real connection with her audience, the kind that vaudeville performers used to have as a matter of course. Her shows at the Palace were events. People lined up around the block for tickets. Celebrities came to see her. The press covered every performance. And Garland, standing on that stage where so many legends had stood before her, seemed to draw strength from the building itself. She sang her heart out, performance after performance, giving everything she had. The audiences that came to see Garland weren't just watching a show. They were participating in a ritual. Many of them remembered when the palace was the palace, when vaudeville was king, when live entertainment was the only entertainment that mattered. Watching Garland perform in that space was like stepping back in time, like touching a piece of history that was rapidly slipping away. The phrase 25,000 voices comes from one of Garland's performances at the palace. She was singing Over the Rainbow, her signature song, and the audience started singing along with her. Not just a few people, everyone in the theater. The critic who reviewed the show wrote that it sounded like 25,000 voices, though there were only 1,800 people in the audience. It was hyperbole, but it captured something true. When an audience connects with a performer in a space like the palace, the sound they make is more than the sum of its parts. It's transcendent. This run established a new purpose for the palace: nostalgia. The theater became a place where aging stars could perform, where audiences could reconnect with the entertainment of their youth. Garland was followed by other performers from the golden age of Hollywood and Broadway. Singers, dancers, comedians who'd started in vaudeville or early television and now found a home at the palace. This wasn't sustainable as a long-term business model, but it kept the palace alive. More importantly, it reminded people why live performance mattered. You could watch Judy Garland on television or listen to her records, but being in the same room with her, hearing her voice without electronic mediation, feeling the emotion radiating from the stage, that was something else entirely. That was what the palace had always offered, and what no technology could replicate. The 25,000 voices moment represents something profound about live performance. When you're in a theater, you're not just watching. You're part of a collective experience. Your laughter encourages others to laugh. Your silence makes others listen more carefully. Your energy becomes part of the performance itself. This reciprocal relationship between performer and audience, this live connection, is what vaudeville understood and what modern entertainment too often forgets. The palace, in these moments with performers like Garland, became a time machine. You could sit in those seats and feel what audiences in the 1920s felt. That electricity of live performance, that sense that you're witnessing something that will never be exactly the same again. Every performance is unique, unrepeatable, precious in its impermanence. The final chapter of the palace story is about adaptation, about how a building survives when its original purpose becomes obsolete. From the 1970s onward, the palace underwent multiple transformations, each one trying to find a sustainable future while honoring its past. In 1987, the palace was designated a New York City landmark, which meant it couldn't be demolished, but also meant that renovations had to maintain the building's historic character. This was both blessing and curse. The theater was preserved, but updating it to modern standards became exponentially more expensive and complicated. The solution that eventually emerged was to make the palace a Broadway theater. This was a return to legitimate theater, but not in the way anyone in the vaudeville era would have recognized. The palace became home to long-running Broadway shows, musicals that would play for months or years, the kind of extended runs that would have been impossible in the vaudeville format. Disney's Beauty and the Beast ran at the palace from 1999 to 2007, giving the theater its longest-running show in history. This was ironic on multiple levels. A theater that was built for variety, for constantly changing programs, was now showing the same show 8 times a week for 8 years. But it worked economically, and it kept the building alive. The renovations required to make this happen were extensive. The backstage areas were modernized, the seats were replaced, sound and lighting systems were updated. The interior was cleaned and restored, bringing back some of the gilt and grandeur that had been lost over decades of neglect. When the work was finished, The palace looked more like its 1913 self than it had in generations. But here's what's strange and wonderful. The building remembered. Performers working in the renovated palace would report odd experiences, hearing laughter when the theater was empty, sensing presences in the wings, feeling watched during rehearsals. Skeptics would dismiss these as imagination, but anyone who's spent time in old theaters knows there's something about these spaces. They absorb history. They hold on to the emotional residue of thousands of performances, millions of audience reactions, decades of human drama. The survivors aren't just the building, they're the people who keep the palace's history alive. Theater historians who document every show that played there. Former performers who share their memories with anyone who will listen. Preservationists who fight to maintain the building's historic integrity. Audiences who seek out performances at the palace, specifically because of its history, wanting to connect with something larger than themselves. There's a tour you can take of the palace now, when shows aren't running. The guide will tell you about Martin Beck's vision, about the vaudeville golden age, about the famous performers who graced the stage. You'll see photographs on the walls, faded images of performers in outdated costumes, doing acts that nobody performs anymore. You'll stand in the auditorium and try to imagine what it was like when this was the most important theater in America, when playing the palace meant you'd reach the absolute pinnacle of show business. The truth is, you can't really imagine it. The cultural context is gone. Vaudeville isn't a living art form. It's a historical curiosity studied by academics and occasionally recreated by enthusiasts, but no longer part of the fabric of American entertainment. The palace survives, but the world it was built for has vanished completely. Yet something persists. When you sit in the palace today, watching a Broadway show or attending a special event, you're sitting in the same space where legends were made. The stage is the same stage where Will Rogers told jokes that made the nation laugh. The walls are the same walls that contained the sound of Judy Garland's voice at its most powerful and most fragile. The seats, though replaced, occupy the same positions where audiences in the 1920s gasped at acrobats and wept at singers. The survivors carry the palace forward into an uncertain future. Broadway itself is struggling with many of the same challenges that killed vaudeville: rising costs, changing audience preferences, competition from streaming and other forms of entertainment. Nobody knows if theaters like the Palace will still be operating in another 100 years, or if they'll become museums, monuments to an art form that couldn't adapt fast enough to survive. So what does the Palace Theater mean? What does it tell us about America, about entertainment, about the human need to gather in the dark and watch our fellow humans do extraordinary things? The Palace is a story about impermanence. Everything changes: art forms, business models, cultural values, architectural styles. The vaudeville that seemed eternal in 1925 was dead by 1935. The building that was state-of-the-art in 1913 was obsolete by 1950. The performers who were household names are now forgotten by everyone except historians and enthusiasts. Nothing lasts forever, no matter how magnificent it seems at the time. But the Palace is also a story about resilience. The building should have been demolished a dozen times over the past century, but it survived through sheer luck, occasional waves of nostalgia, and the dedication of people who believed old theaters matter. It adapted, changed purpose, found new reasons to exist. It's still there on Broadway, still hosting performances, still connecting performers and audiences in that ancient, essential way that defines theater. Most importantly, the Palace is a story about the human need for live connection. We are social creatures. We need to gather together. We need to share experiences in real time, in physical space. We need to hear live voices, see live movement, feel the energy that comes from being in the same room with other human beings who are all focused on the same thing. Every technological advance in entertainment has been predicted to kill live performance. Movies were supposed to make theaters obsolete, Television was supposed to finish the job. The internet and streaming were supposed to deliver the final blow. And yet, theaters persist. People still seek out live performance. There's something about it that cannot be replicated by any technology, no matter how advanced. When Martin Beck built the palace in 1913, he was building a monument to human creativity and the power of live entertainment. He couldn't have known that his palace would outlive him, would outlive the art form it was designed for, would survive wars and depressions and technological revolutions. He couldn't have known that over a century later, people would still be walking through those doors, still seeking the magic that happens when performers and audiences come together in that special space. The Palace Theater stands as proof that some things, not many, but some, can survive the brutal passage of time. Not unchanged, not in their original form, but transformed, adapted, reimagined for new generations. The building at 1564 Broadway isn't really the same theater that opened in, but those memories matter. They remind us of what we were, what we valued, how we entertained ourselves before movies and television and the internet. They connect us to our cultural ancestors, to the performers who built American entertainment from nothing but talent and ambition and relentless hard work. They give us perspective on our current moment, reminding us that everything we consider modern and permanent will someday be as obsolete as vaudeville seems now. Walking past the palace today, you might not give it a second glance. It's just another Broadway theater, its marquee advertising whatever show is currently running, its facade no different from dozens of other buildings on the street. But if you know the history, if you understand what happened inside those walls, you'll pause. You'll look up at the building and think about Martin Beck's mad dream, about the showgirls who danced until their feet bled, about the comedians who perfected their timing over thousands of performances, about Judy Garland singing "Over the Rainbow" to an audience that sang back to her with 25,000 voices. The palace isn't just a building. It's a repository of human ambition and creativity, a time capsule that contains over a century of American entertainment history. It's a reminder that live performance matters, that the connection between performer and audience is something worth preserving, worth fighting for, worth keeping alive even when economics and technology suggest we should let it die. In the end, the Palace Theater is proof that some dreams don't die. They just change shape. Beck's Palace is still standing, still hosting performances, still serving as a space where magic happens and audiences gather in the dark to be amazed. That's not nothing. That's everything. That's why we build theaters in the first place, why we preserve them, why we keep coming back to them generation after generation. The lights at the palace still burn bright. The stage still waits for performers. The seats still fill with audiences seeking something they can't quite name. That feeling of live connection, of shared experience, of being part of something larger than themselves. As long as that need exists in human hearts, places like the Palace will endure. The Palace rose on Broadway over 100 years ago, built by a madman with a vision. It should have fallen dozens of times, but somehow survived. And it's still there today, still creating the magic that happens when performers and audiences come together in that sacred space we call theater. That's the real story of the Palace. Not its decline or its various resurrections, but its stubborn, impossible, glorious refusal to disappear. Some buildings are just buildings, but some buildings are dreams made solid, proof that human creativity and ambition can create something that outlasts the people who built it. The Palace Theater is one of those rare structures that transcends its physical form to become something more, a symbol, a memory, a promise that as long as we tell stories and make music and dance and laugh together, we're human. We're alive. We matter. And that's worth preserving. That's worth fighting for. That's worth remembering, even when the world has moved on to newer forms of entertainment, even when nobody plays the palace anymore in the way they once did. because the palace isn't really about vaudeville or Broadway or any specific form of entertainment. It's about the eternal human impulse to gather in the dark and watch our fellow humans do extraordinary things. That impulse hasn't changed in thousands of years, and it won't change in the future. The palace stands as testament to that truth. A palace of dreams, of memories, of magic that happens nowhere else but on a